Imagine your first day at a new job does not involve an awkward icebreaker or a free plastic water bottle. It involves waking up in a freezing Siberian labor camp in 1930, surrounded by men who view the concept of regular employment as a literal sin. Welcome to the onboarding process of the Vory v. Zakone, the thieves in law, who built the foundations of the Russian Bratva. You are now an entry-level initiate in the most exclusive, terrifying, and strangely bureaucratic criminal country club on Earth. Most people think organized crime is just about breaking legs and taking cash. But the Russian underworld operates less like a street gang and more like a highly toxic corporate startup where HR carries a rusty shiv. Today, you are going to learn how a group of starving prisoners in the Soviet Gulag system created a shadow society that eventually hijacked an entire superpower. And we are going to look at the exact rules you would have to follow if you wanted to survive this. Multi-generational corporate ladder. So put on your heavy winter coat, try not to look anyone in the eye, and let us look at the employee handbook. Our story begins in the early 20th century, right when the Soviet Union was trying to build its worker paradise. Joseph Stalin decided that the best way to motivate people was to send millions of them to labor camps in the middle of nowhere. This created a massive business problem for the prison guards, who suddenly had to manage millions of angry citizens. To fix this, the authorities made a classic middle management mistake. They decided to outsource the daily discipline to the actual hardened criminals. The career criminals looked at this situation and realized they had just been given a massive promotion with zero corporate oversight. They separated themselves from the political prisoners, whom they viewed as weak intellectuals who actually believed in things. The criminals called themselves the Vory v. Zakone, which translates to the thieves in law. They did not mean they followed the laws of the Soviet state. They meant they followed their own law, which was infinitely stricter and came with a zero-tolerance policy for mistakes. If you were a political prisoner, you spent your days cutting down trees until your fingers froze off. If you were a thief, you sat in the barracks, drank a terrifyingly concentrated tea called shafir, and decided who lived and died. It was a beautiful system of workplace efficiency, provided you did not mind the casual cannibalism during winter escapes. To join this elite inner circle, you could not just fill out an application. You needed a resume that was permanently etched into your skin. In the Western world, a tattoo is something you get on a wild weekend in Vegas that you regret for the next 10 years. In the Soviet penal system, a tattoo was a literal legal document. Every line, every shadow, and every picture told the exact story of your criminal career. If you had a tattoo of a church with 3 spires, it meant you had served 3 distinct prison sentences. If you had an executioner holding an axe, it meant you had murdered a relative, which probably made family reunions very awkward. The most important tattoos were the 8 pointed stars. If you received these stars on your shoulders, it meant you were recognized as a top-tier boss, an elite executive of the underworld. If you received them on your knees, it meant something very specific. It meant, I will never kneel before authority. It meant you would rather let a prison guard break your legs than show a single second of respect to the government. Now you might think to yourself that these stars look pretty cool, and maybe you want to get them on your summer vacation. That would be the last graphic design choice you ever made. The Vory took their brand identity very seriously. If you arrived at a prison with a tattoo you did not earn, the local bosses would call an emergency board meeting. They would give you a choice. You could either remove the tattoo yourself using a piece of broken glass or a block of sandpaper, or they would remove the skin for you, along with whatever body part happened to be attached to it. The system was completely self-policing because nobody wanted to be the guy caught lying on his LinkedIn profile when the auditor has a sharpened screwdriver. Once you had the proper ink, you had to live by the Thieves Code. This was not a loose set of guidelines. This was an absolute ideology that made monastic life look relaxed. The first rule of the code was that you could never hold a legitimate job. You could never earn money through honest labor, because honest labor meant you were contributing to the Soviet state. If a boss was caught holding a broom or fixing a leaky pipe, he was instantly demoted and stripped of his rank. The second rule was that you could never pay taxes. This is probably the only part of the code that modern American billionaires actually agree with. But the Vory took it to the extreme. You could not own property, you could not have a bank account, and you could not have a permanent address. You were supposed to be a ghost, a professional nomad who lived entirely off the criminal economy. The third rule was the most difficult for regular people to understand. You were strictly forbidden from having a traditional family. You could not get married, you could not have children, and you could not maintain a relationship with your parents. The Brotherhood was your father, your mother, your wife, and your children. If your biological brother was being beaten to death by police, you were supposed to walk past him like he was a stranger. Because the moment you love something, the state has a lever to pull against you. And the Vory did not give anyone levers. Every single ruble you stole did not belong to you either. You were allowed to take enough to buy food, cigarettes, and maybe some clean socks. The rest of the money had to go into a centralized mutual aid fund called the Obshak. The Obshak was managed by the most trusted elder bosses. It was used to buy off prison guards, smuggle drugs into the camps, and support the families of members who had been executed. It was basically a corporate pension fund, except instead of investing in index funds, they invested in corrupt politicians and high-quality hacksaws. But even the most perfect corporate culture eventually suffers from internal politics. In 1941, Adolf Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union. Stalin suddenly realized he was running out of soldiers to throw into the meat grinder. So he went to the gulags and made the prisoners an offer. If you fight for the Red Army against the Germans, we will give you a full pardon and let you out of prison. A lot of the prisoners looked at the offer and thought that fighting Nazis sounded slightly better than dying of scurvy in Siberia. They joined the army, fought all the way to Berlin, and became war heroes. But when the war ended, Stalin did what dictators always do. He broke his promise and sent them right back to the gulags. When these veterans walked back into the prison barracks expecting a warm welcome, they found the traditional bosses waiting for them. The old-school Vory looked at the military medals on the veterans' chests and felt absolute disgust by picking up a rifle and fighting for the government. These men had broken the first rule of the code. They had cooperated with the state. The traditionalists called these veterans Suki, which translates to bitches. And so began the bitch wars. This was not a minor disagreement in the break room. This was a decade-long, ultra-violent purge that took place across the entire Soviet camp network from 1945 to 1953. The prison guards loved it. They would put 50 traditionalists and 50 veterans in the same barracks, lock the door, and place bets on who would be alive in the morning. The warfare was primal. Men were killed with sharpened spoons, heavy rocks wrapped in towels, and industrial machinery. If the veterans won a barracks, they would force the traditional bosses to kiss a knife to show submission. If a boss refused, he was killed on the spot. If he complied, he was no longer a thief, and his life was ruined anyway. This war fundamentally changed the Bratva. The old, pure monastic code was broken. The survivors realized that if they wanted to survive the future, they could not just sit in a corner and be proud of their traditions. They needed to adapt, they needed to get smart, and they needed to start playing politics. The real golden age of the Russian mafia did not happen in the prisons, though. It happened when the entire Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. Imagine you are a mid-level manager at a state-owned factory that makes tractor parts. Suddenly, the government disappears, your rubles are worthless, and your workers are selling the factory windows just to buy bread. Into this complete chaos steps the modern Bratva. They did not wear prison rags anymore. They wore imported tracksuits, heavy gold chains, and drove black Mercedes sedans that they bought from corrupt German car dealers. The 90s in Russia were known as the Wild East. It was a period of capitalism so pure and violent, it would make Wall Street executives faint. Every single business in Russia, from a grandmother selling potatoes on the street corner to a massive oil refinery, needed a krisha. Krisha literally means roof. It was your protection racket. If you did not pay a local gang 20% of your profits for a roof, your store would mysteriously combust. And the local fire department would, coincidentally, be stuck in traffic. The competition between different mafia groups during this time was insane. Moscow turned into a war zone. Businessmen and rival bosses were being blown up in their cars so often that insurance companies started putting mafia clauses in their policies. If you walked into a fancy restaurant in Moscow in 1995, you did not look at the menu first. You looked around the room to see if anyone was wearing a leather jacket and holding a briefcase, because that meant you should probably finish your soup very quickly and leave through the kitchen. The Vory had transitioned from prison survivors to boardroom directors. They realized that instead of robbing people on trains, they could just buy the entire train network during the privatization fire sale. They teamed up with the new oligarchs, bought up state vouchers for pennies, and took control of the largest metal, oil, and gas companies in the world. The old Thieves Code that forbade owning property was officially dead and buried. The new code was much simpler. Get rich, buy a villa in the south of France, and make sure your accountant is better at math than the Federal Tax Service. So what does the Bratva look like today? They have gone completely white collar. The tracksuits are gone, replaced by bespoke Italian suits that cost more than your car. The tattoos are hidden under long-sleeve shirts, because it turns out that having an executioner on your chest makes it very hard to get a bank account in Switzerland. The modern Russian gangster does not carry a rusty knife in a prison camp. He sits in a high-rise office building in Moscow or a penthouse in London, managing a portfolio of shell companies and cryptocurrency wallets. They run some of the most sophisticated cybercrime rings on the planet, holding foreign hospitals and corporate networks hostage for millions of dollars in Bitcoin. And they do it all with the quiet, polite smile of a legitimate international businessman. They have achieved the ultimate corporate dream. They took a startup that began in the worst labor camps on Earth, survived a violent structural reorganization, and turned it into a global conglomerate that can influence international politics. But the ghost of the old system is still there, hiding under the surface. The hierarchy remains. The respect for the elders is still absolute. And if a modern executive gets too greedy and forgets where the company came from, he might find that his corporate car has a very old-school piece of plastic explosive attached to the ignition. It is a reminder that no matter how many degrees you have from Western business schools, you can never truly leave the Gulag behind. So let us wrap this up with a quick performance review. Are you ready to sign the contract and get your first star tattoo? Or are you going to stick to your safe, boring 9-to-5 job where the worst thing that can happen to you is a passive-aggressive email from your manager? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button before the local boss finds out. You are viewing our internal documents without a proper protection racket. Stay safe out there, keep your head down, and remember to never look too closely at the black sedans parked outside your apartment.